Good afternoon, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This video is an assessment of Robert Mugabe. Happily, Mugabe is history. It seems he's going to resign in a matter of days, perhaps hours, because there has been a military putsch in Zimbabwe, even though the military denies that. The top brass has got control of Mugabe, and he's playing along with them, but so far he's obstinately clinging to the presidency. ZANU PF, Mugabe's own party, has voted him out as leader. ZANU was for decades little more than the Mugabe fan club, and even they have turned against him. It's reminiscent of Italy in August 1943. The military and the Central Intelligence Organization are the only things that actually work in Zimbabwe. They're the only people who get paid on time when 90% of the population is unemployed. Why is it that they got paid on time? Mugabe was desperate to keep them happy because he knew they're the only ones who could remove him from power. He said that only God could take him out of office. He was going to stay until he was summoned to meet his maker, and it was an attempt to form a dynasty that has been his downfall. I recall what the late Christopher Hitchens said, that he had supported Mugabe to the hilt in his fight against the Smith regime, and Hitchens lived to see Mugabe turn into everything that Mugabe's enemies ever accused him of being. So, background about Robert Gabriel Mugabe. He was born 1924. He's from the Shona ethnic group. He was educated by Catholic missionaries. He was told a lot about the Irish separatist rebellion in the early 20th century, and he seemed to want to copy that. He attended the University of Fort Hare in South Africa, one of the few universities for black students in that part of Africa at the time. Became friends with many of the early leaders of the ANC, and later went to work in Ghana, the first former British colony to become independent in Africa. So he's a Pan-Africanist. He cares not just about Zimbabwe, but about the entire continent. Indeed, he married a Ghanaian. So he returned to Zimbabwe later. It was known as Rhodesia at the time, and he was involved in nationalist activities. His organization was outlawed. He was imprisoned for his dissident activities in 1964 and released 10 years later. So he was battling against the Smith regime. In 1965, Zimbabwe issued the Unilateral Declaration of Independence. The white minority, about 5% of the population, virtually monopolized political power for themselves. It was a unilateral declaration of independence, as in only Zimbabwe was saying it. The United Kingdom was not granting independence to this country because the white immigrants were refusing to share much control with the black majority. So Mugabe soon became leader of ZANU, Zimbabwean African National Union. One of the countries called Zimbabwe, not Rhodesia, because that was named after Rhodes, a British politician and businessman who most Zimbabweans regarded as an invader. There was an ancient city called Zimbabwe. The ruins were found in the early 20th century. Some Britishers were racist and said this couldn't possibly be built by black people. It must have been built by Portuguese who came hundreds of miles from the coast, or Arabs. Well, in fact, of course, it was built by black people. So anyway, there was a guerrilla campaign in the 70s against the white-dominated government. Eventually, ZANU and ZAPU were crowned with victory. Not outright victory, but at the Lancaster House Agreement, they achieved most of their goals. Then in 1980, Zimbabwe became independent. Prince Charles was there at the ceremony, and I've seen the footage of Mugabe taking the oath of office as Prime Minister. He's nervously taking his glasses off and putting them back on as he does so. Anyway, there he took over. But he seemed to be very conciliatory at the beginning. But 3 years later, he launched the Gurahunde campaign against the Ndebele ethnic minority. It's claimed that some Ndebele wanted to rebel and some arms caches were found, which might be true. However, what the security forces did went far beyond a legitimate security action. The most conservative estimate of the number of civilians killed by them is 1,200, might be up to 20,000. That's what the International Association of Genocide Scholars say. So this went on for about 5 years, though most of the slaying was at the beginning. The foreign media was reporting it, and these human rights organizations were telling Mugabe what was going on. He point blank denied any wrongdoing. But this was not small scale. No counterinsurgent force will ever be blameless. Sometimes they will make honest mistakes. Sometimes they will deliberately kill civilians. Well, this was the latter, purposely slaying civilians, knowing them to be civilians, and Mugabe did nothing about it. So people rightly condemned apartheid South Africa for deliberately killing civilians at Sharpeville and Soweto and so forth. But much of the world turned a blind eye to Mugabe. It proves that people can get away with the most horrific crimes against humanity if they'll just call themselves anti-colonialist. Then all is forgiven. But he enjoyed decent relations with most other countries, including the Commonwealth, and people just shrugged off the Gorokunde massacres like, oops. And one British diplomat said, we had to maintain relations. All through the 70s, we've been accused of being soft on the white minority government in Zimbabwe, so we couldn't be seen to be critical of Mugabe. Anyway, Mugabe was later given an honorary knighthood by the Queen in 1994. Seems staggering now. And he ran the economy into the ground. Had the worst hyperinflation in the world. The HIV crisis, the pandemic spread to be one of the highest rates in the world. Again, I know Mugabe didn't cause this disease to spread, but he didn't do enough in terms of public awareness. Other countries were more successful. So Mugabe said himself he's Hitler tenfold, a very cruel leader. He was canny enough not to actually outlaw opposition parties, just to have his thugs kill hundreds of peaceful opposition activists and rig elections and so forth. So you've got a look east policy. Now, it's true that China is an important commercial partner, but it's also because with the Chinese, business is business, and there'll be no pesky questions about human rights. He tried to shoehorn his wife into power, but it seems that she can't get her feet into the correct Gucci's for the presidency. Emerson Mnangagwa, he's 72, he's the army's man, he fought against Ian Smith's government, so it seems that he's probably going to get it. But there's little grounds for optimism. He's just as bad as Robert Mugabe. He was complicit in all these horrific atrocities in the 80s. So sadly, not much is going to change. There's been a musical chairs coup d'etat. They simply swapped one leader for another whilst leaving all the institutions and policies the same. I hope that I'm proved to be dead wrong. So that's that. He's going to have a very comfortable retirement. He's probably terminally ill with prostate cancer. Why did the military move when they did? They must have known something the rest of us didn't, that perhaps Mugabe's death is imminent. There might be other reasons. They wanted to move whilst they could get their man in as a president. They didn't want Grace Mugabe to become president and then have to try to overthrow her. If the old boy will not stand down, then they could easily impanel a medical commission to declare him not compos mentis, say he's lost control of his mental faculties and is therefore incapable of discharging his duties as president, something like that. Anyway, he has been a monstrous tyrant. There were some successes in the early days, of course there would be. The fighting was over, sanctions went over, so of course the economy grew in the 80s, and there was a lot of goodwill behind him. He was genuinely popular in the early days. There was a fairly free media and all that. Elections were not marred by much cheating in the early days. What else can I say? Literacy, that's been a major achievement. There's 90% literacy. But in most other ways, it's been horrific. He's reduced people to malnutrition, and many people have fled. It was hilarious to see the youth leader of ZANU PF saying he was willing to die for Mugabe a week ago. He has now eaten his words. Why would people be in ZANU PF even now? I suppose it's self-interest. A lot of people are driven by that, more so than ideology, and they will say things they don't believe, or indeed delude themselves into thinking that he really is good news for the country when he has caused untold misery for it. So there we have it. I very much hope that the country changes drastically from Mugabe. I know his defenders will say, isn't it bad we had the old government, the old days, which with racial discrimination, and Smith's men tortured a lot of people and so on. And all that's true, which doesn't make what Mugabe is doing permissible or desirable or anything like that. Mugabe's partisans will always change the subject to what was happening before 1979. That's never going to come back. Mugabe's always tried to scapegoat whites. 0.2% of the population in Zimbabwe is white. They're mostly geriatrics. He's the last person in the world to think that the United Kingdom is a superpower. Hasn't been one for decades, as though all the economic hardship is due to the UK and not him because of British sanctions. The United Kingdom wasn't trading much with Zimbabwe even before these sanctions. So this is the ultimate failure of leadership when he refuses to take responsibility. Therefore, he really can't go soon enough. Mnangagwa probably won't be better, but I suppose at least he won't be senile.